Hello and welcome. In this particular session, we are going to learn how to create a pivot table. We have seen that there are certain checkpoints for preparing a pivot table, and we have learned how to perform those checks. We have our data sheet over here. The first check is that there is no empty column in our range. So we see that there is no empty column here. The first column is A and the last one is L, and there is nothing beyond that particular column. And we also do not have any column without any heading. All the headings of the column are going to be used as pivot table fields. So all the columns have headings, so the first criteria is satisfied. The second criteria is that there is no empty row. To check that, I'm going to click on the first cell in the data range and then press Ctrl and down arrow key on the keyboard to go to the last cell in that particular column. Now, this method takes you to the last cell which is continuously filled in the range. How do we know that there is no empty row in the middle? Let me go back on top by Control up arrow key, and we will insert a row in the middle just for testing purpose. And now I will use Control down arrow key once again. It takes me to this particular cell, which is the last cell in this column, and that is continuously filled. So this is how we know that when you use this method of Control down arrow, it will take you to the bottommost cell in that column and all the cells in between will be filled. So let me delete this row for the time being. Similarly, you can use Control right key to go to the rightmost column in that particular row. Okay, so in this particular sheet, there is no empty row. The third criteria is to make sure your data is in the correct form and format so that you get fruitful pivot table, and we have already done that. In order to create a pivot table, what we will do is we are going to click on any cell in the data range and go to Insert tab on the main menu and click on pivot table icon, which is the leftmost icon here. When you click that, you will get this dialog box, and the first option is select a table range. Excel auto selects the range which is continuously filled, and in our case it is A1 to L2532, and we have seen that that was the last row in the range. We are going to stick with the first option, and we are not going to learn about the second and third option in this particular course. The second field or the second dialog is choose where you want the pivot report to be placed. And the first option is new data sheet and second is existing worksheet. So if you want the pivot table to be there in the same worksheet as this, then you choose the second one. But most of the time you would prefer to have it in a new worksheet. So when you do that, we will click OK, and it opens a new worksheet. There is a new worksheet opened here. Our data is in this sheet. This is the new worksheet opened. This range is the place where your pivot table is going to get created. And here is the pivot table fields interactive box where you can select what field goes where. For the time being, I'm going to close this. I'm going to delete this and show you what to do in case you have an empty row. So let's say you have an empty row here and we want to select the entire range. So to select the range, what we will do is go to the first cell in the range, which is A1. I will click there. Then I will press Shift and Control key on my keyboard. Keep both the keys pressed, then press the right arrow key. It will take me to the rightmost cell in that row which is filled, and then I press the down arrow key. So it takes me to the range. It selects the range just before the empty row. I will continue to press once again the down arrow key, and it will take me to the first filled row in the next part of the range. And when I press once again the down arrow key, it will take me to the bottommost row. This is how you select the range manually in an easy way instead of dragging using the mouse key or using the arrow keys on keyboard. So we have selected in this particular way, and let's say you want to maintain this empty row in the range and still want to have the pivot table. You will select the range in this way. Click on Insert and click on Pivot Table, and once again check these two options and click OK. Let me explain you what this is by showing you an actual pivot table. I have created a sample report from the same data that we had. Let me refresh this by right clicking and refresh button. The effect of empty row is this. You will see an additional row which is titled as blank, an additional column which is titled as blank appearing in your pivot table. So there are 5 zones in the pivot table. One is this zone in which your pivot table is created in the sheet, which is here. Let me go to this. So this is the zone where your pivot table gets created, and on the right side you have pivot table fields dialog box. And what is that? So there are 4 areas in that. First is on top where all the fields, which is nothing but your column titles, are appearing, and you can select what fields out of this goes into which of these 4 areas. The first area you should see is the values area, and that is this zone where your actual values of the report appears. In this case it is the amount, and if you go to the data, this is the last column is this, which is the total sale amount, and that is what is appearing as the values zone in pivot table. The second 2 areas are the rows and columns. So you can actually drag and drop whichever field you want in whichever zones. In this example, we have chosen that months to appear column wise and the sales executive names to appear row wise. So here you see which executive has done how much sale in which month. So this is how a pivot table can be organized. The fourth zone is on top left, which is the filters zone, and that is what you see here. So for example, if I want to filter this report by a location which is Mumbai, and I want to see only numbers related to Mumbai, you filter it this way. So these are the 4 areas of a pivot table. You have values zone, you have rows, columns, and filters. Now I need not necessarily have columns or rows. You can have either one of them. So I'm going to remove the columns month from the columns, and there you see only rows appearing. So this is the overview of pivot table. Let's go back to our pivot table where we are now going to create it from scratch.